How's it going, everybody? Ed Ricker here. If you haven't noticed in the last couple months, Freewell gear has been killing it with the variable ND filters for the Mavic 2 Zoom and the Mavic 2 Pro. Variable ND filters allow you to dial in your exact neutral density settings on one filter, and you can use an ND4 equivalent, ND16, ND32, using one filter just by turning the filter. Well, they've finally expanded to variable ND filters for a camera like this, the GH5 by Panasonic, or any type of mirrorless or DSLR camera. Why do you need neutral density filters? Well, for a camera like this, I've got a lens on here. This is an f1.2 lens, so it's very fast. So that means if I have it all the way open on the aperture, we have a very bright and potentially overblown, overexposed image. So if you want to darken that image, you got to put something on there like a filter. Neutral density is going to darken your image back to proper exposure. You could buy an all-day filter kit like a ND4, 8, 16, 32, 64, all the way up, and you have all these filters just like bumping around and jostling in your bag, and it's just kind of ridiculous. Or you can get a variable ND filter like this, where one filter, or in this case two, accomplishes what like at least probably 8 or 9 different filters would do if you didn't have variable ND. Now it's a big deal for cameras like this because they don't normally have neutral density filters built in. So using something like this allows you to put on one filter and just turn it to get your exact exposure that you need without having to mess with your shutter speed and your ISO and your aperture on the camera. Now, neutral density filters darken your image without colorizing it. It darkens it by certain f-stops or light reduction. And so if it's a day like this where it's kind of sunny out here, but I'm in the shade, you don't really know exactly what type of filter you need to get the proper exposure that you're looking for. So to be able to slap on one filter and just turn it and it darkens and it brightens accordingly is really cool. Now, variable ND filters are not really a new thing in the camera world, but the way that Freewell gear has designed their filters is kind of cool. There's some pretty cool features of this filter. So in the box, it comes with 2 filters, and one has a f2 to f5 light reduction. The other one has an f6 to f9 light reduction. I'm gonna put a graph on the screen to show you just how much light is reduced by each of those f-stops. Today, we're just out here with the sun, so I'm gonna use the f2 to f5 filter right here. Now, unfortunately, my camera lenses here, micro four thirds with the GH5, 62 millimeters diameter, which means I have to use a step-up ring from 62 to 72 to be able to use these filters. And then the neutral density filter just screws on right like that. All you do is turn it in increments to get your proper exposure you're looking for. So out here, we might actually tend toward the f5 on the dial. If I were to actually shoot this way toward the shade, it might be more of an f3 situation. Now, one of the benefits of using a variable ND filter is you can get very shallow depth of field when it's sunny. So normally with a camera like this with no built-in ND filter, you'd have to close your aperture a lot, you have to raise your shutter speed, you'd have to lower your ISO, and then you start losing some of your shallow depth of field. And so if you're shooting an object, a subject, you don't have that shallow depth of field that you might be looking for. So by using a darker ND filter, you can then open up that aperture a lot more and you get a much more shallow depth of field. Now I'm gonna put on screen a couple examples I shot the other day of some leaves. Some of the shots have very wide open aperture and some have very closed aperture with the same settings. And you can see that the depth of field is much more shallow in one shot and a lot less shallow in another shot. So, in full-on sun, it's really great to have a neutral density like this if you want to get shallow depth of field in your image. Ed from the future here. I was editing this video and I thought I should say, you may not always want to have a shallow depth of field with your shots. Sometimes you want to have a deeper depth of field to have more of the shot in focus. For instance, I was shooting these leaves on the ground and I realized my f1.2 lens was way too shallow. It didn't really make sense for the shot. I actually had to bump my aperture up to like f4, maybe f4.5 to get more of the shot in focus. And then I backed away a little bit on the variable ND. Having more of the shot in focus for this particular shot made more sense for the subject, and I think it turned out to be a better shot. Now, one really cool thing about these filters is that, well, first of all, it has a magnetic lens cover, just like that. So no more screwing on or pinching with little tabs. It just sticks right on there and it's gonna stay, and that's really cool. I like that. Another thing I like about these filters is it turns only to a point and then it stops. And that is important with variable ND filters. A variable ND filter is basically two polarized filters back to back. And that's how they work together to create the variable ND filter effect we're talking about. However, if you turn a variable ND filter too much, it starts creating this blue haze in your image. It almost looks purple. So this one actually has a hard stop right at the very edge of where it's effective. And I like that. It keeps it safe. It keeps you from ruining your image. Now, one thing about the cases, I'm not a huge fan of the cases. I think they could probably use something that would be maybe a little bit rigid, but still something that has a little bit of a cloth top. It's cool that we can see what filter's in here with the clear plastic, but I've only had these a couple days and I've only used them a couple times, and I've already scratched up the case a lot. So I don't think I'm gonna be using this case in the long run. So for what they do, I really think they're a good filter. They don't colorize the image, and that's pretty much all you want with the variable ND filter. There's also no vignetting. Now, like I said, I'm using a step-up ring. The filter's already bigger than the lens, so you're not gonna see any vignetting anyway, but I still think it performs well. Variable ND filters also sometimes cast a bit of a lens flare, like from the sun, onto your image, and I have noticed that a little bit. I don't normally shoot into the sun like that anyway, so it's not a big deal, and I don't mind a little bit of lens flare. It looks natural enough to me, but just keep that in mind if you're shooting into the sun, or if the sun is kind of being reflecting onto the filter, you might notice a little bit of lens flare. Me again. I just want to say another benefit of having a wide open aperture, in addition to shallow depth of field, is you don't get crazy lens flares like this from the sun. A very closed aperture will create kind of like a starry, like a very sharp, pointy sun lens flare. Now, it might look cool to you, you know, and more power to you. But if you don't want to have that type of lens flare in your shot, well, open up your aperture. So, price. This is $130 for this filter, and $130 for that, and together $250. So they're not exactly cheap, but at the same time, I feel like they are premium in quality and they're good. And the fact that they have a hard stop on the dial, plus the magnetic cap that goes on the front of it, it feels like a really good filter in those regards. And so I think it's actually worth it. I have used cheaper filters in the past, but like I said, I've also ruined my image by turning it too far and getting it blue. And I had to kind of remind myself to just not turn it as far as it could go. And I'm not even getting my full advantage out of some of those cheaper filters. So for $130 or together $250, not a bad price. Can you go cheaper? Yes. And can you probably get the same quality image off of something cheaper? Yes, but you just have to be careful. You don't have some of the fail-safes that a premium filter like this would have. So keep that in mind. Check the video description down below for a link to the Freewell Gear variable ND filters. Also, thank you to Freewell Gear for sending these to me to review and for putting my name on the edge of them. That's really cool. Now, that doesn't mean these are like Ed Ricker Signature Series filters. This is just for me, but it's still cool. Thank you. To learn more about the video making gear that I usually use in my videos, check out kit.com/edrickervlogs. And until next time, happy shooting.